Welcome to Resiliency Within, and I'm Elaine Miller-Karish, your host today, and I am so blessed to have on my show again Dr. Ravi Chandra from San Francisco. Oh my goodness, he has done so much in his life. It's you really do have a lot of accomplishments, Ravi. I think you can say, first of all, you have a new accomplishment that I want to shout out to. So you have received the 2025 Kun Pao Su Award for Achievement in Asian American Psychiatry by the American Psychiatric Association and APA Foundation. So congratulations for
Well,
that.
thank you. Thank you. As I like to say, the world has gone mad when they give me an award.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think maybe it's going right when they give you an award. But so if you haven't guessed already, Dr. Chandra is a psychiatrist, but he's so much also, in addition to that, he's a writer, a poet, a filmmaker, and a compassion educator in San Francisco. But when I first heard about that, you had actually won an award at Cannes for your film, your documentary debut, The Bandage Place from AIDS to COVID and Racial Justice. I mean, talk about being proud of being, part of the
Well,
psychotherapeutic
I just have to put an asterisk. It's the Cannes Independent Film Festival.
independent
So
film
it was an
festival.
independent virtual film festival. It's not the big Cannes. So there are
Well,
lots of film festivals in Cannes. So
but
yes.
still, it has CANNES in
I
its.
know, I know.
That is pretty. That
Yes.
is pretty amazing. And you did
Yes,
send it to me,
yes.
and I was able to watch it. It was very
Oh,
moving.
great. Oh, thank
So
you. That's very
anyway, so
kind.
I reached out to you. I said, there's so much happening in the world. I would love to have you on the show to get your reflections and also hopefully to give my listeners some ideas of additional ideas to kind of maneuver what's happening in the world today. When I first came across you, we both blog for Psychology Today,
Mhm.
and I came across one of your pieces of work, and I said, "Oh, I have to have you on the show," because you talked about how we can embrace all of us, that we have a common humanity. Um,
Mhm.
you said it in some very eloquent words. It's much better coming from you than from me. But I just said, right now, I've seen as a resident of Los Angeles County, great suffering since
Mhm.
January 7th, when the fires came and really destroyed two cities, Altadena and the Palisades and part of Malibu. But also that there's been an overshadowing of everything that's been happening with the current administration, that many
Mhm.
people are, unceremoniously losing their jobs, not because they've necessarily done anything wrong, but just because maybe they're just part of what needs to go in terms of a certain perspective, which some people may or may not agree with. But I think that we need a way to deal with the suffering. I think the other thing that I was mentioning before the show started is that most people in the United States get their mental health services paid for by Medicaid. And
Mhm.
there's also going to be, according to the administration, big cuts in Medicaid, which is going to influence the mental health of our entire country. So, with all of that, being a leader of the American Psychiatric Association and all the different accolades that you've received in your life. And by the way, this is a person who has his undergraduate degree from Brown, his medical degree from Stanford, and his residency from the University of California at San Francisco. So, quite a pedigree, Ravi, as I think people should know that
Well,
you studied hard and you have really earned your place as a spokesperson and also getting the accolades that you're getting as being someone who really represents the Asian American community in a way that they wanted to recognize. So, with that, over to you.
well,
What's on your mind
you
today
know,
as
uh,
we get
well,
started?
I just need to say, I also, you could add to that, my car recently had issues. And so, I mean,
Oh,
it's
yes.
like I'm a human being and,
Yes, of
and I'm
course.
fortunate enough to have a car, fortunate enough to have a mother who cared for me and who supported my education and all of that. I was going to tell the mechanic when I take it in, don't worry about this little breakdown because I've been broken down for a long time. So, so this is
Okay, so
this
you're a
is
human being that has
yes,
also
yes,
issues like all of
right,
us. I mean,
right.
and I think that's part of what's
Yeah,
going on today
yeah.
too, because I was out at a school that in that was in the Palisades. That
Mhm.
70% of the children lost their homes. And I was talking to some of the people there, and they're going, well, it's been so hard with the loss of the homes and
Mhm.
jobs. But they go, but also then, one of my colleagues, her mother's dying. And then another person, the spouse lost their job. So there is the other windstorms and storms that happen in life with everything else that's happening in the world. So I think that's what makes it a little bit more difficult. You and I were talking that we're seeing in our people, our client population, that they're coming in more distressed. So anyway, over to you,
Yeah.
knowing that yes,
Well,
you are human
well,
like the rest of us, as well as having many accolades. So go ahead. Yes.
and human and lucky in many
Yes.
ways. But also, I mean, Elaine, were you directly affected by the fires?
I'm in
Or
Claremont, so we are
Mhm.
about 20 miles from the Altadena fire. So all we had the
Mm.
smoke and the
Wow.
ash,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we also had lost power for like
Mhm.
24 hours. So I myself was not, but there's a good friend of mine, Patty Giggins. She came on one of our resiliency pauses through the Trauma Resource Institute and said, it seems like everybody in LA County is trauma adjacent to the fires
Yeah.
because we all have either know someone or have personally experienced a loss. And also, there's something about places, right?
Mhm.
Even the old the Beatles song, "There's Places I Remember," um, that were very dear to me personally. My daughter was married in Malibu, for example, at a friend's
Mhm.
house that has burned down. And so there's all these little, kind of landmarks for people that may, there's gradients of losses that I think many of us have
Mm.
experienced in LA County.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, it's been heartbreaking really to hear all the stories. And I have friends who are down there who have been affected, and families been affected. And really heartbreaking to hear the stories of people losing their parents and loved ones to the fire as that marched through. And, I just want to hold a big space of compassion and caring for everybody who's been directly impacted by that tragedy. And there are storms going on in Australia, and so there's a lot going on. And actually, this I was just pulling it up. This the Insight Timer gave me this wonderful quote this morning. The mind craves for formulations and definitions, always eager to squeeze reality into a verbal shape. And that's by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was a teacher of many of the American Buddhist teachers and so forth. But so it's hard to find words, I think, to squeeze reality into a verbal shape. I mean, this is just so large what's happened, right? And we,
Absolutely.
I think, I'm just very touched that you reached out to connect to me at this time, and I think that's what we all, need to do when we're in distress. No one can take care of themselves. That individualist myth of self-regulation is just horrible. It really, no one totally self-regulates. We all lean on each other in some way. When we're children, of course, we're totally dependent on our parents, caregivers, and so forth. And then in some ways where we become independent, but I think we're really we're more interdependent and intertwined than perhaps some people are aware of. And it's only at times of trauma that we really that part of us breaks open and we need to lean on others. And, whether it's reaching out for mental health care or community support or pitching in and lending a hand. I mean, that's what's so moving too, is that from what I know, from what I've heard, and you've probably seen this in action, people in LA really have
Oh
come
my God.
together in so many ways. Mhm. Yeah.
They have it so
Mhm.
sweet and nourishing to see what people have done. And we did a project with LA County Department of Parks and Rec, and
Mhm.
all these young people ran care camps for children who'd been
Mhm.
affected by the fires right after it
Mhm.
happened. And these are young people that are like they're Park and Recs folks, right? They're
Mhm.
lifeguards. They do different things, and they didn't know they were they're going to at the point of their employment walking into
Mhm.
supporting children who may have just lost everything. And these young people actually rose to the occasion. And
Mhm.
one of the wonderful things as we got to work with them, the helpers, right, caring for the helpers, is we asked a question about is there a moment of generosity with everything that's
Mhm.
happened that stands out to you? And there were tears in all of our eyes as people said,
Mhm.
remember when one mother brought some clothing for the children? This one little boy found something that was similar to something that he had lost. I mean, there were so many
Mhm.
stories
Yeah.
that
Oh,
people
that's good.
shared. And when they did,
Mhm.
we could feel that collective connection that
Mhm.
you're talking about.
Mhm.
That was is one of the things, almost like it's the the gasoline or the energy, the nourishing
Yeah.
energy that keeps us going when we experience the immensity of the loss.
Absolutely. And then, I think the other big crises from my experience, I would say Hurricane Katrina and 9/11. I mean, two other, things where we can think about how did we and didn't we come together? How did we view the victims and the people who were just given so much heartache and trauma? How do we treat them? How do we continue to treat them? And I think, there's a lot of talk about trauma-informed therapy, trauma-informed health systems. And I mean, we really have to have a trauma-informed society. Like everybody, you don't know what battle anybody's been through, right? What fight they're carrying in their bosom and in their lives. And I think if we're just maybe just 10% more open and listen more. And I actually had for lunch chole, which is an Indian dish, Chole. It's garbanzo beans. It's just a standard curry. But I said we have to have diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI with chole, which is curiosity, humility, openness, listening, and empathy. We need all of those things to make the web really vital and work for us instead of falling prey to the people who want to disrupt the web of connections between us.
Well, and I think the compassion empathy is particularly important. And I remember our first conversation, which was back in January of 2024, where you talked about after some of the elections that you needed to really do a deeper dive into compassion
Mhm.
in order
Mhm.
to kind of maneuver through it. And I'm just wondering if
Mhm.
you want to say a little bit about that now, because I think people are struggling with that right now. How do I find that
Yeah.
compassion and empathy when there's so much uncertainty?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, yeah, I think so. I think love is an organizing principle in human life. Compassion and love are integral to our survival over all the hundreds of thousands or even millions of years of evolution of our lineage. And I think that we have to, sometimes we absorb enough from our family environments, from our communities and so forth. We can get enough to strengthen and fortify ourselves. But in times of distress, I think we need to do more. And so I think love is a tremendous healing force as well. And as we talked about, we lean on each other. Well, to build communities that can hold distress, we need love and compassion. And we need to, I mean, that's an inside out job and an outside in job. And certainly after Mr. Trump was elected in 2016, I mean, like many others, is feeling terribly defeated and sorrowful and just in grief for what had happened and what we didn't know what was coming, but we knew the kind of personality he has anyway, the what he his tactics and so forth. Um, and so I took a mindful self-compassion intensive and eventually became a teacher, and I was able to kind of help myself have compassion for my own distressing emotions and be able to see my distressing emotions better, add the umami, the extra flavor of friendliness and compassion to my inner life more, to make my inner life and relatedness more tasty and delicious. I mean, that's my own kind of and
A nice
umami.
food
Yeah,
metaphor.
right. Umami is the fifth flavor, right? And so the same thing, we need an extra flavor in our inner lives and relatedness to make them tasty and delicious and wholesome. And so actually, and that also the self-compassion practice helped me kind of have empathy and compassion for Mr. Trump, I think. It's like, oh my gosh, he, what he must you can't be a quote unquote happy person. And that reminds me, you can't be happy. So, it's like could he be insecure? Could he be feeling perilous, like he's losing grip on, something big or something, all these kinds of, these are projections of mine. I don't know him, obviously, but all of those ideas. I wrote an article at Psychology Today, Compassion for Trump. And I think so we're not at peace. And that, Dr. King had a quote that he hoped for a time when the soul of the nation would be at peace with its conscience. And you could almost say it the reverse, the conscience would be at peace with the soul of the nation. So, I think, peace requires a conscience and consciousness. And, how do we generate? We can't be conscienceless. That will not bring peace. That brings torment and furthers a pattern of abuse. So I think, so for me, the self-compassion helped me stay true to my values, and just really define and refine and nurture my conscience as well. And so, so this is all a dynamic process. And so self-compassion is soothing, but it also helps you focus on suffering. And certainly when I'm with my patients, I try to see underneath the words and the actions, what is the emotional experience of the person, you know? And so much of my work really does revolve around people in distressing relationships, as you know. I mean, as I say,
Right.
sometimes I think mental health or mental unwellness or unrest is all related to relationship, as I call it, PAFDAR: paranoia, anxiety, frustration, distress, discontent around relationships. So it's all of those, how we're just in tension with each other. And, it's very difficult. Relationships can be, as I forget which poet said, hell is other people and heaven is other people, right? I mean,
Oh,
so
right. Heaven and hell.
yeah,
Yes.
and any of us could be hell or heaven to another person, right?
That's exactly right. And there's
Yeah.
something that I want
Mhm.
to ask you about. You said that it gave you more compassion, for
Mhm.
example, towards Mr. Trump, that you saw,
Yeah.
that I wonder how he is, and in terms of maybe and wanting peace for him, if there's if that's possible for him, or even praying for peace or meditating on peace. So with that was 2016, and here we now
Mhm.
are in 2025. So I can't believe that's been 9 years, but there we
Mhm.
are, there we have it. So is there something about how this journey for yourself brings you
Yeah.
to today, and how
Yeah.
you've been is it a continuation? Is there something, have there been more added ingredients since then, to use our food
Yeah.
metaphor?
Oh my gosh.
So
Indeed. Well,
yeah.
it's a rocky road and it's up and down. And I don't want to sound pat around having compassion for someone who is to my mind, quite abusive to vulnerable people. And very, it relies on stoking division to garner political strength and to, thump his chest and so forth. It's really, having compassion is a step. I can try to retain a seed of that and remembering he's just human. We have shared humanity, but he's also kind of a Godzilla, on the continent, thinking that's all his territory, and all the people have to band together to kind of say, how are we going to deal with, Godzilla, and I'm not, just like, so this is a consciousness struggle. Like, how do we deal with our own Godzillas, also our own, I think,
Right.
he's kind of a
Yeah.
mirror to kind of the worst of, I think, the worst of our tendencies. As violence expert Bandy Lee says, violence is an impulse gone awry. So this is like, oh my, we all can have all of these tensions and impulses and feelings of possibly aggression towards others. Well, if they go awry, then something bad does happen to other people. If we can find a way, I think, to remember that, to have some restraint and to recognize that even when we're super distressed by someone, we we find a way to comfort ourselves and not let that impulse go awry. So, I mean, this is all an evolutionary process, and so I think, like everyone, there are moments of anger and frustration, which try to channel into community activities and helping out in some way on some campaign, calling my representatives and so forth, and trying to make a difference in my professional organization. So and of course, being in contact with community and helping my patients as they face these distresses. So, all of that becomes a kind of body of knowledge and a body of awareness and a body of connections. So we're not isolated. I mean, we're all, as we say, we're all going through this together. We're all in this together. And I don't. I'm not so naive. I used to think, oh, maybe Mr. Trump will have a Saul on the road to Damascus moment and come to Jesus, so to speak. Or I'm not Christian, and but
Yeah,
that kind of moment of like,
right.
oh, I
I
was
think
kind of I'm doing the wrong thing. But I don't, I feel like I don't want to be naive about that. If that happens, great. But I think I'm more interested in our this what we do with the stimulus of greatly traumatic times, the poly crisis. How can we use this trauma to generate deeper belonging? Because suffering is a crisis in connection, and the opposite of suffering is belonging. So if we can, have that attitude, keep our eye on the ball, like no matter what's happening, even if the chips are way down, we got to find some way to connect and create a little bit of belonging uh, and islands of belonging along the way. If we can create islands of belonging, maybe it can become a continent and then a world. So
Well,
that's
and
where
I
I
think
try to
those,
stay.
those islands of belonging are very important right now because I think that I've heard people speak about feeling a certain amount of loneliness and
Mhm,
sometimes despair about not knowing what to do and feeling like this, not watching the news any longer. I don't think I can do that because it just sets me off
mhm,
in a trajectory during the day where I can't just think or that I
mhm,
physiologically feel like a sickness in my belly when I see a certain action that is so antithetical to my values as a human being. And I think
mhm,
that's part of what I've seen that seems to be a little harder to get through. It's like the moral
mhm,
injury that goes along with policies or procedures. Or, I've been working very closely with Ukraine for 3 years, and one of my incredible Ukrainian colleagues, I just one day after all these things have been happening, I mean, I could just see the state of her despair on a Zoom call and felt so helpless to be able to help her.
mhm,
Because the reality was there are, as she said, I don't know whether I'm going to be alive tomorrow or not
mhm,
because of the existential threat of a war that's in her country. So, I mean, those
mhm,
are harder things, right, than me saying, well, I disagree with your policy on, getting rid of the Office of Education, even though I may not like that. It's different
yeah,
than, well, I could die because of this. And I think that's what makes it more difficult for people also that work not only within the United States, but internationally, because there are a lot of things that are happening right now with US aid, for example, that could be the termination of a project that could result in the deaths of human beings. So that I think is one of the things that make it a little bit more difficult. That's why I'm saying, okay, Robbie, help me with that one. Because
yeah.
I think I'm
Well,
talking about myself here when I'm saying
no, Elaine, thank you for keeping that alive and present. Uh, you know, I've been thinking a lot about that, and I think first of all, in terms of what's happened since 2016, in 2020, George Floyd was murdered on my birthday, actually, and that led to my making that film. It led to me taking a an impromptu sabbatical for several weeks, where I had to really kind of get in touch with what had been disrupted in my heart of hearts and in my life, and that started a lot of writing at eastwindezine.com, long form essays, and and then actually also the the Oval Office interview recently, what was it, just a couple weeks ago with President Zelensky,
Yes.
just outraged me and just deeply shook me because, you know, so Mr. Trump said something about you could start World War III if you resist. I mean, that's like telling an abuse victim, oh, if you stand up for yourself, then you could cause World War III. In this house, I'm the big daddy. Don't tell me I'm an abuser. Don't tell me Grandpa Putin is an abuser. That could start World War III, young lady. I mean, just I mean, it's just that I'm being just trying to draw an analogy. I mean, it's so vile, and I actually decided to take another impromptu sabbatical this month, and I'm seeing
The
relatively
result.
few patients. Yeah, and just to kind of really hone in on the challenge and try to be creative. And that goes to the life of the artist, which we can talk about. I know we have a break coming up shortly, but the life of the artist, and every human being is an artist, and relationships are a work of art as well. Therapy is art in the medium of relationship. So, so this is conversation, understanding, and the pathway towards love. I think that's all
And I
part of it.
also want to
Yeah.
say, Ravi, I love the fact that you took a sabbatical. And
Mm.
that because to me, not everybody can take a sabbatical, but we
Yeah.
can do things that can be being more gentle with ourselves. Kind of like
Yeah.
a kindness
Yeah.
that we might
Right.
give to someone who's suffering, we can give that to ourselves. And I
Yeah.
think when we are leaders like you are, like I am, that gentleness needs to come from within us as well,
Yeah.
towards ourselves,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
sometimes when we are leaders, it's hard to take those moments of, wait, I need to pause right now because
Mm.
I've been giving so much that I need to
Yeah.
nurture what's happening inside of me as well. So I really want, I mean, my listeners to really hear that. If
Right.
you're
Well,
out there,
yeah, that's
be
right.
gentle with yourself.
Yeah. A media diet. Be
It's a
be
media
good to
diet,
yourself.
definitely.
If you need to get your news from the late night comics, I think that's kind of, might be a encapsulatable thing. But, just as saying, self-care is important, media diets are important, and community engagement can also be very healing as you kind of just, instead of looking at your screen, talk to somebody, share your griefs and fears, and find solace in community. I think that's all very important.
Well, I
Yeah.
recently watched, I was watching some show and it was Jeff Bridges, who, and the actor, I really appreciate him. And he was talking about his distress and how he was volunteering for an organization. I can't remember the name of it, but it had to do with feeding children. And so sometimes if we can see the results of, let's say, our volunteering or our donation, that also might be the way that we nurture ourselves when we feel like there's so much we can't control. There may be
Mhm.
some things that we can. And certainly giving a donation that is our, let's say, your locus homeless shelter, for example,
Mhm.
may be
Mhm.
something that helps someone
Yeah,
who's suffering in a
exactly.
way that you can actually see the result. Now, we're going to take a short break, Ravi, to hear
Okay.
from our sponsor, the
Mhm.
Trauma Resource Institute. And I just want to
Mhm.
say, as we're going to be hearing from them shortly, that the views of myself and my guests do not always necessarily reflect the views of the Trauma Resource Institute. So, with that, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Ravi Chandra. We're talking about really how to take care of ourselves during these most kind of difficult and I'll say unprecedented times, and how I guess we can be gentle with ourselves. And I love that you had said before the break that you were going to take um, a sabbatical, that you knew that you needed to do some nurturing after observing some
Mhm.
of the things that were happening in the press. But I was wondering now if we could maybe do a little bit of we talked about the three arrows of Buddhism
Mhm.
before the show started, and maybe that would be some another way for reflection for my listeners today, and
Mhm.
ways to help us through what people may be experiencing right now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's important. I mean, everybody has a capacity for what they can hold at any moment, and maybe we all have capacities for what we can hear, the suffering we can take from others. But of course, we all benefit when we increase our personal and communal capacities to understand and be with and be creative in times of suffering and difficulty. So that's a real. I mean, Buddhism is all. I mean, the focus is really how to relieve suffering, how to overcome suffering, and so the in Buddhism, the Buddha said, the first arrow of suffering is the actual suffering. What's happening? It might be the pain that you have in your leg. Okay, very specific. Then this is backed up by neuroscience. There's a second layer which is what the mind does with the pain, with the suffering. You can make it worse, you can make it less. There's mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is proven in research to reduce the experience of chronic pain. And that's also, how we hold our suffering, how we have insight, mindfulness. If we can name and label the emotions that spill out from that, rather than jumping into a story, narrative, criticism, judgment. It's like just take care of that emotion without going to all these catastrophic fears and worries and narratives like that, like, creating a Netflix show in our mind, based on whatever's happening. Oh my God, this could happen, this could happen. So really just take care of the emotion. Now, the third arrow, yeah,
Can I
sorry.
just add something? The
Yeah.
other thing that I've learned on top of taking care of the emotion is also the physical aspects that are connected
Mhm.
to the emotion. Because
Right.
sometimes we can be in
Mhm.
such a state of
Yeah.
distress, our heart's beating fast, our muscles are tight,
Mhm.
and that if we do certain, like mindfulness walking, for example,
Yes.
going
Mhm.
outside in nature and just being very mindful of taking each step, or if we can
Right.
sometimes call up something that has nourished us from the past. Like I often think
Mhm.
about my granddaughter. She nourishes
Mhm.
me not only from the past, but for the present. And
Mm.
I can
Mhm.
sense a certain experience physiologically of well-being that
Mhm.
reminds me of what else is true. So I think
Yeah.
that those both can be interconnected into having a different perspective of how we're
Right. Mhm.
experiencing the suffering.
Right.
So
Right.
go ahead. I just wanted to add that.
Right. No, and that's
Appreciate
absolutely right. That's a perfect example because as I said, disconnection is at the root of suffering. The opposite of suffering is belonging. There's that great scene at the end of the Fred Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, where the director, the interviewer asks everybody to think of somebody they love, and if we can just, kind of be present, be really present with our physical surroundings, our what feels safe, the relationships that have felt safe and nurturing. It's such a relief, right? And that's one thing. People. We'll touch on this. I mean, we just occupy this roughly 6 foot membrane around the Earth. But you think of how big the Earth is. I mean, that's a giant living organism, and we're just like this little membrane around it. We cause so much trouble. This little 6 feet, causes so much trouble, right? If we could only like, okay, it's not all about that 6 feet, it's about that whole thing. I mean, we should
Well,
be in awe of the
what
earth. That's another way. It's like, whoa, let's
yes.
settle down. It's a nice day. The sun is shining. Maybe not everything is, horrible, right? I mean, so there's ways to ground ourselves in the moment, in reality, in our bodies, in our relationships, without, the passing winds of whatever gust comes from DC or elsewhere, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
There you sparked a thought, though, I wanted to share, and that is many people have shared with me, and I've experienced this myself, is that we may have friends and family who we dearly love that are really excited about what's happening politically in the world today, and we may not be. And so
mhm, right.
how do we have relationships with those people that have been part
Mm,
of our connectedness? And
yeah.
I've thought a lot about this. And so what I try to do is I think of the nourishing moments with those folks,
Mhm,
why I
mhm.
love them. And even
Right.
though there may be the windstorm of this differences of opinion about how to go forward with whatever it might be, I that doesn't I haven't lost the fact that, oh,
Mhm.
remember the
Yeah.
time on that vacation, or do you remember the moment when we did this wonderful thing
Mhm.
together where there was
Right,
that
right, right,
connection?
right.
But I have to work
Mhm.
harder at
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
But I think
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I do that, then it softens. I think it's one of the ways that I can take care of myself with relationships that aren't easy,
Mhm.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense to
Well,
you.
I think that's a great technique. And it's like, oh, remember, we are connected. I read another great technique in an article at the Greater Good Science Center last fall after the election, talking about this. I said, well, you could distract your mind completely and think about, gee, I wonder if they like carrots or peas. And just like, okay, they're people. I wonder if they like carrots or peas or cauliflower, or or what's their beef, I suppose.
Or what's your
You know,
beef about? Like, I actually wrote something for psychology today, trying to going, well, if you're right in the mid there, you're at the house and you're talking, you'd go, oh, you know what? I need to go make those chocolate chip cookies I promised you. So
right,
let's
exactly,
go to the kitchen.
exactly,
We're going to make cookies,
exactly,
right?
exactly, exactly. Let's make cookies, not war, right?
Let's make
So,
exactly.
but I think it's hard, and so this brings up that third arrow, which is how do other people that first arrow was the suffering. The second arrow is what our own minds do with the suffering. And the third arrow I've thought of, my formulation is what do other people do with our distress and our suffering? And that it's like, oh gosh, I wish that we could be united, that callousness is not a good thing, that cruelty is bad, that, maybe we should try to understand and repair our disconnection rather or more than our opinions, certainly. So I think this exposes just the need for such deep repair work. And I think I hope we can all support each other in just like at least holding the ship steady to compassion and kindness and love and trying to draw people into that. Like, have you thought about the Deep Canvassing Institute has an empathy guided approach towards talking to people. It's like really basically on a subject such as the budget. Did you know what do they feel about the budget? Where will they support budget cuts or oppose budget cuts on a scale of 0 to 10, 1 to 10? And if they are somewhat in the middle, like I suppose, or a little bit favorable, you would talk to them about what their experiences are. What do where do they get their, or what their opinions are, their experiences, and if they have an empathic conversation, for example, like, oh, do you have anybody in your life who would be affected by cuts to Medi-Cal, Medicaid, TennCare, the Healthy Florida program? I mean, these are all, names for Medicaid programs throughout the different states in the country. So 80, and they say, oh, well, those people should work or something like that. Well, it turns out, I mean, so we find out all these things, but like, oh, do you have anybody in your life who, oh, I have somebody who has cancer. Well, how would you feel if they lost their health care? I mean, these are like, it's like trying to find ways to,
Tangible things that
yeah, yeah,
somebody,
right.
yeah.
Connect with empathy. Like, okay, you can have that opinion, but and I appreciate your opinion, but how would you feel if this happened? And that's like it's so distressing to me that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which we could hope maybe we'll have time to talk about in a compassionate way, I think. But he's so dismissive of measles deaths. I mean, my God, a child just died, and more children may die. This is a preventable illness, and it's a very contagious disease. So to turn a cold shoulder to that is really horrible. And that the GOP congressman, I believe, who said grandma should be willing to sacrifice her life for the economy during the COVID epidemic. I mean, that's just horrible. I mean, is he trying to score? Are they trying to score rhetorical points or look tough? Or it just doesn't add up for me.
Yeah, and so it's
Yeah.
like like if you're talking to a person that may express that, you go, well, can you help me understand how one
Yeah,
child's life, what would be, that you're not valuing that child's life,
right,
and
right.
when it's a totally preventable illness. And I'm old enough, I'm older than you, that I remember I was at the, consciousness regarding the polio vaccine
Mhm.
when that first came in, and polio used to destroy so many children's lives and adults' lives. And then it was the miracle of the polio vaccine. I remember standing
Yeah,
in line when I was
yeah,
four, getting those first doses, and
right,
how
right.
that changed
Thank you.
the world,
Yes,
right? And so we
yes,
can't lose our progress by having differences
yeah,
of opinion regarding science. I guess
yeah.
that is very concerning to
My
me.
my dear science teacher in high school what had polio when he was a child. He walked with a limp. I mean, just and just his life was saved by medicine. And polio and other diseases, these don't get cured with magical thinking.
Yeah.
You need science, you need caregivers, you need all of that. I mean, this is hard stuff, so I think we got to support that network and do better. I mean, we could do so much better at caring for people who are really vulnerable, and not just, RF. So this, I'll segue to, I came to the United States at about 2 years old in 1969. This is about a year after Martin Luther King was assassinated, about a year after Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And I was abandoned by my own father essentially as well. I was raised by a single mom in the deep South, the Midwest, before going to college on the East Coast and coming out to California. So, I think about, and my father actually, when he was connected, he is intermittently connected. When he was connected, he likes to read biographies. He gave me Arthur Schlesinger's biography of Robert F. Kennedy. And as a young kid, I was deeply moved by the goodness of Robert F. Kennedy. And I've often thought, and I've cried many tears actually, thinking about his death. And sure, Malcolm Martin and other people, political assassinations in the 60s were horrible. John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X. I mean, so
Medgar Evers.
but
Yeah.
our yeah, so exactly. So Medgar Evers, yeah. So all of these horrible, horrible, and you know, and but I've cried tears thinking about Robert F. Kennedy's death because I think as a young child, how much would I have benefited as a child of a single mother with somebody like that in the White House? Now, I looked up to Jimmy Carter, who just passed a few months ago, and he was an important figure for me. I wrote him a letter when I was 10 years old, about my crazy ideas to save energy, just like, just because I just appreciated the goodness of the man. So we all exert influence on each other. And I think, my God, if it was hard for me to imagine, like, oh gosh, what a loss uh, Robert F. Kennedy's death was, how much more so for RFK Jr. And I think, what kind of a man would RFK Jr. have been if his father had lived? You know? And the same thing if poor Donald Trump, if his father had been uh, compassionate instead of cruel. Maybe his brother would have lived. Maybe Donald Trump would have turned into a different man. So, these are the scars that people carry. So, this is the drama of the abused child, the child of loss and grief that's unresolved, and something, we all have some ability to have resiliency and bounce back, but we so much depend on each other. Sometimes I think we're living in kind of a knockout timeline where there's something called knockout mice where they knock out a gene and see how that affects them. Well, we have kind of a knockout timeline where important people, just really pillars of society, have been murdered. You know, George Floyd also, and so that's for any of us. So we think, wow, we are filling a hole in time made of these losses. And we have to fill that with compassion and kindness and warmth and humanity, rather than get caught up in our suffering and blaming and scapegoating and villainizing and demonizing. So I think that's something we have to get past for our evolution. And I wish RFK Jr. all the best. And a lot of people have in our distance, we felt a little piece, a tiny sliver of his loss and his family's loss.
Well, see,
And,
and that's, I think
yeah.
when you
Mhm.
talk about that, mentioned trauma, and we know that trauma impacts children. There's, incredible scientific evidence about this.
Mhm.
There's that adverse childhood experiences study that came out of Kaiser Permanente. And so, but I love the way you put it, because when we have that broader lens and say, oh, I read about his father, the kindness, the ideas
Mhm.
he had, that sadly he was killed. And yet, and here you experienced a loss
Mhm.
and tears from reading about his life
Mhm.
and how his life was ended in his 40s. And here his son must have been majorly impacted. And then how
Right,
did
right,
that change his life?
right, right.
What you're saying is helping me to think
Mhm.
about the bigger picture. You might
Mhm.
be angry at an act right now, but if you look at the larger picture of the person, you're putting in the context of why they may respond in a certain way. And that can be helpful for us in how
Mhm.
we go forward with what we do. So it may be, well, maybe I'll pick up that biography about Robert
Mhm.
Kennedy and read
Mhm.
about his works, or read about Medgar
Mhm.
Evers.
Evers, yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
actually, Medgar Evers' family came
Mhm.
to Claremont, where I live, after he was killed. And I know his daughter very well, Rena Evers Everett. And recently, Joy Reid
Mm.
was a MSNBC broadcaster. She came to Claremont, because she wrote a book about the
Mm.
love story between Medgar and Mary Lee Evers, by the way, who's
Mm.
still alive, the widow. And it's a beautiful story of how they worked together for what was right and just. And so when
Mm.
I read those kinds of stories that Joy Reid wrote, that is about the life of my dear friend's parents, that's something that instills hope in me, because their struggles continued, but they also had the hope of getting a whole army of people to work with them that did
Mhm.
change many things about America. Not perfectly, of course, but did change things. And maybe that's something that we can also remember, that my dear friend from my dear friend from Ukraine, I won't say her name, but she said, Elaine, sometimes it's darkness before the light. And
Mm.
maybe that's something to remember as well, that we learn from the darkness about what we can create.
Yeah.
Like you said, the
Yeah.
artistry, when you said that from the George Floyd horrific death that we all saw on,
Mhm.
living color on television, that prompted you to make the documentary. And
Mhm.
that has had a
Mhm.
life of its own.
Yeah. Well, that's our capacity as human beings. And if I could, speaking of art and the art of being human, I think we all have to find our creative voice in some way to work with our suffering. And James Baldwin had something wonderful to say. Do we have maybe a couple minutes? I can read this
Yes, I
quote.
would, I would,
All right.
one of my
So
favorite books. And
Baldwin wrote, I really don't like words like artist or integrity or courage or nobility. I have a kind of distrust of all those words because I don't really know what they mean any more than I really know what such words as democracy or peace loving or warlike or integration mean. And yet yet one is compelled to recognize that all these imprecise words are attempts made by us all to get to something which is real and which lives behind the words, whether I like it or not, for example, and no matter what I call myself. I suppose the only word for me when the chips are down is that I am an artist. There is such a thing. There is such a thing as integrity. Some people are noble. There is such a thing as courage. The terrible thing is that the reality behind these words depends ultimately. Uh, 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 I'm sorry. Oh, let's flip that. There is such a the terrible thing is that the reality behind these words depends ultimately on what the human being, meaning every single one of us, believes to be real. The terrible thing is that the reality behind all these words depends on choices one has got to make forever and ever and ever, every day. I am not interested really in talking to you as an artist. It seems to me that the artist's struggle for his integrity or their integrity must be considered as a kind of metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily of all human beings on the face of this globe to get to become human beings. It is not your fault. It is not my fault that I write. And I never would come before you in the position of a complainant for doing something that I must do. The poets, by which I mean all artists, are finally the only people who know the truth about us. Soldiers don't, statesmen don't, priests don't, union leaders don't, only poets. And then I just saw a movie last night about Gary Snyder, the great American nature poet, who's 95 years old, and I saw him in person. He's so wonderful. And this movie, Oh Mother Gaia, had a poem. I'll read the last lines to you, which brings us to the scale of what we're talking about. The last lines of this poem, front lines as the cricket's soft autumn hum. As the cricket's soft autumn hum is to us, so are we to the trees, as are they to the rocks and the hills. So that just puts the scale of this. We are the crickets. It's so evanescent, right, and so transient, and so fragile. So we are to the trees, as are they to the rocks and the hills. So there's so many layers that we're enfolded in, right? So I think that gives me a great sense of awe about everything, but I have great awe in people as well, and the amount that we can do when we care for each other, and we really, I think don't take each other for granted. And that's why I so appreciate your reaching out to me. It's like this wonderful synchronicity and chance to connect again. So I appreciate that.
Well, and as you read as you read the poem, I was thinking just of the interconnectedness of all of us, of the earth, of people, of the trees, the rocks, the mountains, the creatures
Mhm,
that live
mhm.
in our backyards and our fields, and how when we have that again, that wider scope, I think
Mhm.
it does help to kind of
Yeah.
maneuver the suffering that can exist in this moment because of what is
Mhm.
happening in our world.
Yeah.
So, Ravi, we only have a few minutes left. And so I didn't mention your book. Can you tell people about your book and where they can find it?
Oh, sure. My 2017 book is called Face Buddha: Transcendence in the Age of Social Networks. And they can go to facebuddha.co to find out more details.
Okay. And then if people wanted to reach out to you, do you have a social media present that they may want to, send you an email or reach out to you? Do you have something like that that people can?
Oh, yes. Maybe I'll give it to you to put in the link. But I have a Substack, so I have a irregular newsletter that comes out, which I share my writing with, and they can reach out to me through that as well.
Okay, so um, I think I want my listeners to know how much I value you and your perceptions, and your compassion, and how you care. I know for many people in your office, but also how you care for the world. And
Mhm.
that was one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out to you, knowing that the world is in a state of suffering, just like James Baldwin wrote, many years ago before his death, and that there
Mhm.
are ways that we can maneuver through it. And
Yeah.
I love the idea of our artistry, is to
Mhm.
thinking about our individual artistry and what we create in this present
Yeah.
moment that can actually bring us maybe greater peace and that kind nurturance that we all need. So
Mhm.
I want to see if there's a last word that you'd like to say.
Well, this is poetry. Life is poetry. I think we live, they don't call it the universe for nothing.
Yes.
So our lives in it can be an unfolding of poetry.
Yes. So thank you so much. Again, Ravi Chandra, MD from San Francisco, my birthplace, because I love San Francisco because of that and many other reasons. And to my listeners, to remember what else is true. Yes, that there may be suffering, but there's other things. What has helped you in the past? Who's helped you in the past? Reaching out to the people that you love, and the people that you love that sometimes are you're having some challenges with, to maybe remember those moments of
Mhm.
of love and nurturance that you've had with them in the past, and you can call that up into the present moment. So until we meet again, this is Elaine Miller Karras signing off for Resiliency.